Hey, we're live.
Oh, hi.
It says live in the corner.
Live.
Okay.
Live.
Hi, guys. I'm gonna give it a few minutes here. Let's put this on Do Not Disturb, actually. Can you do that? How do you do that? There we go. So I'm just gonna give it a few minutes while we wait for people to come on. This audio is also going to be recorded for a podcast. So what we're going to do is we're kind of talking to you now, but for a clean podcast, I'm going to press record in a minute here. And from there, we're going to go through the topics that Patrick wanted to talk about. And then when we're done with it, if you guys have any comments or questions, we'll kind of address it once we stop the recording, just so we have a clean recording. So welcome. All right, here we go.
Do that.
You just know that's the recording.
Oh.
Okay, so we're going to do the real audio recording.
Sorry.
All right, here we go. It's a process. It's a learning process. Okay. Well, thank you for listening to the podcast today. My name's Kylie Terhune. I'm your personal trainer and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. I'm really excited. Patrick's back on the podcast, and in fact, today he's actually going to lead it. So I kind of get to sit back, relax, and ask him questions. So take it away.
Okay. So hi, my name is Pat Terhune. Obviously everyone knows that. But I wanted to speak a little bit about leadership if I could today. Obviously, as we said in podcast 1, I've spent some time leading organizations and trying to get better at leading myself and being a leader in my community and leading my family and all of those things. So I wanted to just share 3 main points that have really helped me over the years with being a better leader. So just a little bit of context real quick. I went to West Point and I served as a commissioned officer in the Army for 8.5 years. So I had great opportunities to lead people. My last job in the Army, I was a company commander, had close to 200 people with helicopters and trucks and all kinds of great things. Then spent the last 16 years with NVR, and the last 10 I've been a plant manager of various size plants in a couple different locations. So have had the good fortune to really learn, and my company's been very patient with me as I've gone through that process. So just so everybody knows, I'm not standing up here saying how great I am and all of those things, because I've essentially made every mistake in the book.
The best leaders have made the most mistakes.
That was very nice of you to say that.
It's
Thank
true.
you. Thank you.
Well, what did they say? The more you fail, or the people that are the most successful have failed the most in their life. So it applies here.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you failed the most in your life.
I think you just called me a miserable failure.
No, but what you're saying is you've learned through your mistakes, and that's the best way to do it. You make a mistake, you learn from it, and then you become better.
Right.
And so these are the tips that you've learned from.
So I think that's important as you look at the mistakes. The mistakes have to be used as fuel to drive you, and everybody makes mistakes. Some people go into marriages and the marriage fails. Sometimes people are too hard on their kids or too easy on their kids. Sometimes people make decisions in organizations that lead to bad things happening, and there's countless examples through military and the business world and churches and all kinds of things where you make a bad decision. So the key, I think, is to use those things.
And we've made those bad decisions.
Of course.
So we're just reiterating that. We've made all these bad decisions.
Right.
It's the only reason we know how not to do it.
That's right. So I think the key is, with everything, and what I've learned is your ego really becomes an obstacle to learning. So a couple things that I've used to help me with that, and just to be completely candid, when I went through high school, I was class president. Everybody told me how great I was. I went to West Point, did really well. Once again, best of the best, and all that commentary that comes with it. So your head grows a couple sizes too big because of that. So over time, you start to develop an invincibility piece. And to be quite honest, I didn't really have any failures until, I think, in as far as leadership in the work environment, until about 7 years ago. So everything was like, everything I touch turns to gold. So it creates a false sense.
But you would also say, too, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that you didn't see as much success in your leadership as you do now
I
before
would
the
agree.
failure.
I would agree.
So things were kind of going smoothly, but you didn't necessarily, if you compared the two to where you were then to where you are now.
Yeah, I would say the results I get now versus the results I got back then, and maybe the people I'm touching, I don't want that to come across as egotistical, but maybe the people that I'm touching and developing.
You have more of a heart in the game now, I think.
Yes, I would agree with that.
I'd say that.
So really the essentially had a fairly significant business failure, and that could have had some very negative consequences, and it was the first time in my life that I went through that. And so really, as you go through that, it humbles you, and I could have really taken a negative tact, a negative attitude, and become defiant, and become, I could have walked away from the company, which, obviously here, being with this company 16 years, 7 years after that event, would have been a huge mistake. And so one of the things that's helped me is the concept of ownership. And ownership is really, it's an interesting concept, and it actually came to me via a book, and I think a lot of you have heard of this. And if you haven't, the book is actually called Extreme Ownership, and by Jocko Willink. He's an ex-Navy SEAL, and it really kind of changed my life. It changed how I viewed my actions, and it's been very much a process. So much so that I have embarked on teaching everybody around me in my organization. I actually am asking everybody.
I'll get like texts, and it's like, get after it, which is a Jocko Willink saying, or, take ownership of this.
Right.
It's literally permeated our lives since he read this book, but for very good reason.
And that's the thing. It's not like a get-rich-quick thing, or, ignore your friends. Like, the message is very positive, and it's all about looking internally. So a lot of times people hear the term ownership and they go, oh yeah, I take ownership. And the first thing that happens when something goes wrong is they immediately go, well, I would have been able to do that if somebody else did it. And so you always have to be careful with, if you use ownership as a baton to bash people over the head, you're missing the point. You should use ownership as a term to bash yourself over the head. So, go ahead.
So quickly, before we go too much into talking about it, define ownership.
So ownership is essentially the way I would define it, and this is not his definition's a little bit different, but my definition is anything that happens to you, both essentially when you look on the negative side, so is your fault, and you have to look at how you could have influenced it better. So if there's if your relationship is strained with your spouse, if you view it as it's yours to fix, then you will take action to fix it. If sales are down at work and you're in charge of the sales unit, if you view it as the economy's fault, you're missing the point. If you view it as your fault, then you can come up with a course of action to fix it. So anything that happens that's within anything in your life that you can actually physically reach out and touch is your issue. It's your point to resolve. Right. So you have to take ownership of your relationship with me. So it's a very important concept. So it really changes everything. We talked to Keegan about this. So if you ask for something and we say no, and you get upset and blame us, Keegan's our son, and blame us for that, well, you need to take ownership. Maybe you asked at the wrong time. Maybe the way you asked had attitude in it. Maybe the timing was wrong. Teaching children how to be socially and emotionally intelligent, to understand their environment, that's very important. And the only way you can do that is if you look internally. So when I look back on the mistakes I made, absolutely it was things I ignored, business trends that I didn't see coming, hubris, my own ego, thought I could just make it happen, and I couldn't. So that's the key. And I think the thing that ties into that is humility. You have to have a large dose of humility. I was actually joking with a coworker the other day, and we were basically telling each other how much better we are at humility than the other. And I think that's not humility. Obviously, if you talk about how humble you are, you're also missing the point. So this is very much a journey, and one of the things I've found is I try to be less defiant every single day and every single year. So starting out 2018, I've had some interactions with various people that in 2017 I would have acted in a way that was not humble, and had a lot of hubris. So I'm really continuing to work on that. So, and actually, I think something you and I had an interaction the other day where you said, "Hey, I really didn't appreciate that you did that." And a year ago, I probably would have been like, "Well, why is it a big deal?" I would have kind of gone that road. And working on this myself, I just said, "Okay, I understand that," and I tried to develop a way to improve our communication. So that's the key. Do you think I adequately defined ownership?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think that's the first piece, and I would encourage all of you to go out and grab a copy of Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. It's a great book. It makes it very simple. If you like, stories of Navy SEALs in Iraq, it's a great story. But beyond that, look at the message, and really look at the message of what he's talking about. Anything that happens in your life. So the fact that you can't get up, you committed to a workout program and you can't get up and do it, well, that's your issue. It's not anybody else's issue. Get it done. If you fall off your diet plan, since we're big into nutrition with this,
Yeah.
It's your fault. It's not anybody else's fault.
Personal responsibility and ownership. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that I should really incorporate that with my clients because it's absolutely applicable to everything I work with them on a daily basis, like you're saying.
Right, and I actually said this the other day, and I really kind of keep thinking about culture creation where I work. And I said in the staff meeting that we're going to engage in intentional destruction of ego. And it sounds a very militaristic thing to do, but the point is, the egos are good. There is some good to ego.
And have self-confidence.
Right. There is. You want to. Part of the reason that drove me to try to get to West Point was a little bit of ego, it was a little bit of drive, all those things coupled in. But everything always has to have a balance. But I would always start with extreme ownership, and humility is the big piece behind that. Why do you always feel like you have to be right? Because it's one of the things that happens is when your ego gets flared up, or you feel like somebody is attacking you, you stop listening. That's the first thing that happens when you get upset. It's like somebody, if you had hearing aids in your ear, somebody reaches up and turns them off. So you stop learning. So that's why ownership is a very important concept.
Yeah.
Okay. The second thing when it comes to leadership, and this is in your own life and everything, is study. Craig Greschel, who runs a great podcast, always says when the leader gets better, everyone gets better. So think about that as a parent, as a husband, as a wife, as a coworker, as a person working in a workout program. You just can't. I think everybody, and I always draw this analogy, everybody looks at professional sports and says, yeah, they better watch tape. They should always watch tape. But for some reason, in a lot of cases, people don't translate that to their own personal lives. So professional athletes are at the top of their game, and the ones that are successful for long periods of time, for all you Eagles fans and people that have, actually the Eagles did good, but people don't like Tom Brady. But Tom Brady, he studies his diet, he studies film, he makes sure his teammates are studying film. Peyton Manning used to be the same way. And they would just study. And the teams that do well are the ones that make no excuses. They just continue to get after it day after day after day. So they study. So you have to do the same thing. If you're not getting results in your workout program, well, be self-critical. Get back in and understand what that is.
Well, and that goes to ownership too, because let's just take that as an example. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about, I'm not finding success in this workout program or in this eating lifestyle or whatever. So there's a couple things there, right? One is, well, how dedicated are you actually being? Mm-hmm. I heard something the other day where it was basically like, if somebody tells you they're 90% quote unquote on plan, you can deduct another 10% off of that, because nobody wants to own up to the reality of, well, I snack on this, or I have this, or
Right.
I just didn't want to get my greens in that day, or
Right.
whatever it was.
Yeah.
And but that goes back to ownership. And you have to be honest, first of all, with yourself. But then if you want accountability and support from others, you have to take ownership of your life to others. And if you want to be a leader, you absolutely, in order to influence people, you have to take ownership, and you have to be willing to be honest with yourself.
It's interesting you talk about if you want to be a leader. I always tell people that everyone's a leader. You can lead up.
Or you can lead down.
Or you can lead down, or you can lead laterally. You're a leader in your own life. Like if you want to become healthier, well, you have to lead yourself through that, because there's going to be pitfalls. So
that's the other thing. You were just talking about athletes, and so I was thinking about that. So leading yourself. Mm-hmm. The only thing that separates you from an athlete is that they decided that they wanted to be an athlete.
Right.
They decided that that's what they were going to do with their career.
Yeah.
There's, it doesn't, with few exceptions, obviously, if there's like a medical disability or, there's some special situation, people just, your life ends up essentially the way you decide that it's going to end up. But we don't think about that.
And it's interesting.
Oh, this just happened to me.
Right.
But it's ownership. No, you are where you are because of the decisions you've made, and that goes back to ownership as well.
Absolutely. And then, it's funny. There are some horrible things that have happened, and that they could not control. And a horrible example would be a child who is molested. You can't control that. You really can't. But what you can control is how you choose to live your life after that. And
did you intentionally bring that up?
Well, I was just thinking about, Keegan and I were listening to something today about one of these Me Too moments. And so I think it's, and it's hard. I'm not saying it's not hard. I'm not saying that anything is out there. But you have to choose how you're going to get beyond that. If you wallow in self-pity and things like that, or if you need professional help, you have to go get it. Like that's an ownership leadership thing.
Yeah. And so it seems like a really awkward random thing to bring up, and I wasn't planning on talking about this today, but since it's coming up, he can say that because he knows that that's in my history, in my childhood. And so I have had to, throughout the course of my life, deal with that and say, how do I want to live my life? Certainly not as a victim, right? And so if something comes up where I have an issue because of that or related to that, I have to work through it. And if I want to be better, if I want to be a leader, if I want to live a certain life, then I have to learn and grow from that situation. And it's all about perspective. And I learned that at a very young age, that I had to change my perspective and become a positive person, because it's very easy to become a victim. It's hard to step out of victimhood and say, this isn't going to define my life. I'm going to make something, and I'm going to separate myself from that. It's not going to define who I am or what I can do, even though, of course, it affects you, and of course, it's awful.
Yeah. And those feelings may never go away, and they're hard. And we talk about people who have PTSD and how hard that is. But it's in some of my darkest moments in my life, it took me a little while, but I recognized there was a pattern of things that weren't positive, that weren't helping me fix the situation, versus engaging in a pattern of behaviors and thinking that would help improve the situation. So, we're all there. I often say this to people at work, that somebody will say, well, why does this happen to me? Why do these things happen to me? And I always say, well, hospitals are full of people that, there's a reason a hospital has more than one bed. It's that everybody's dealing with something out there, and all throughout history, there's always been bad things that are happening. And you just have to determine how you're going to face those troubles. If you're in a bad job and it's a bad job, well, then look for a better job. And you can do that. That's your job.
So to take it back to the points that you're trying to make, though, in order to do that, essentially what you're saying by study is personal development.
Yes. So
you're growing yourself. You're learning about yourself. You're learning about the topics that you're interested in, how to become better in the business that you want to grow, how to become better in your personal life. My personal favorite ways to dive into personal development is reading books from people. So, they say that you become most like the top 5 people that you spend the most time with, right? So make a list of who it is that you spend the most time with. And you probably have similarities or commonalities, whether it's in your personality or your financials or your lifestyle or whatever. And so if you want to change that, I think the best way to really start that is by reading books by people that you want to aspire to be more like. So you can essentially mastermind with people that are like way out of your league that you may never ever meet in real life. But you might, if you start reading their books and start taking their advice. The other thing that I love, obviously we're doing it right now, is podcasts. I've learned, and I quote unquote mingled with, I guess you'd say, but I've never met these people in real life. But I have learned so much information from some of my favorite podcasters. So, if you want to surround yourself with positivity, if you want to surround yourself with information, if you're a business person, look up business podcasts and leadership podcasts and ownership and, all this kind of stuff, entrepreneurship. If you are someone that wants to become healthy, look up the #1 health podcasts, Find someone that has a story that is similar to yours, but then changed their life so that then you can emulate and learn from their mistakes. And I think, in regards to study and personal development, books and podcasts are some of the easiest things you can do. And podcasts I particularly love because you can do it when you're driving, you can do it when you're cooking, you can do it when you're doing laundry, you can put it in your back pocket.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just,
when you go, in your case, when you go on like a half marathon.
In my case. Yeah, right. The 10,000 walking steps I do a day.
So if we're going to become like each other, does that mean you're going to start wearing my hair in a bun?
Hey, now let's talk about that. You're going to, man bun time, #man bun. So, but no, we have absolutely rubbed off on each other, and I think for the better. So I think you've calmed me down about things in my life and balanced me out a little bit, and I kind of push you towards things. I'd say I challenge you sometimes.
Yeah. No, you do.
He's already the most patient person in the world, and I probably challenge that ability a little bit too much.
She's teaching me more patience.
I teach him more patience.
How that goes.
And he can teach me patience every day. So
Exactly.
But we talked about in the first couple podcasts as well how we've really influenced each other to be better, to grow, and he's been a tremendous influence on me. Talking about people closest to you, I spend the most time of anybody with Patrick. And without him in my life and without the influence and his drive to become better and to be a good leader, I would not be where I am in my business today. I might not even have the business that I have today and work with the people that I work with.
That's really nice.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, I really wouldn't, because before I met you, I was not on this track. I didn't have the motivation. So you've absolutely kind of spurred that on, and then, I've kind of claimed it myself now. But you totally put me on that track.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Kylene's taught me is the whole course of self-development. I always love to read military history, and there's a lot of great examples in there. But I was more fascinated with like the conduct of the battle versus the leadership that went into it. And partially, I was a military history major.
Who actually bought you Extreme Ownership?
You did.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been a really neat thing, and just a couple of resources that are out there. And I always say this to everybody. So obviously, you can study the Extreme Ownership book. He has a podcast. They're great. You can just type in leadership podcasts, and there are long ones, there are short ones. I always bring this up to people too. The Book of Proverbs in the Bible. Now that I'm looking through things differently from a different lens, you go back into Proverbs that, maybe as a kid, your parents are like, go read Proverbs, and you read it and you're like, okay, I'm done. But you go through there and you're like, wow, this stuff is not new. What's new and what has to happen in everybody's mind is the awakening of what this means, what this means to them. So none of this stuff really is new at all. There really are no new concepts on leadership. It's
Ecclesiastes, isn't it, that says there's nothing new under the sun?
Right. So what changes is the terminology and
the application in our modern world.
In a company that that flies helicopters or whatever, there could be a slightly different, but treating people right, looking internally, driving self-improvement. When you always look at those kinds of people, they are usually the ones that get it. I actually read this the other day. Nick Saban, who coaches the University of Alabama, a lot of people don't like him or whatever because they've won, 7 national championships in 10 years or whatever, which is very hard. He says you celebrate for 24 hours. And after 24 hours, you get right back to work.
You focus on the next one.
Yeah, and so like these schools that will amazingly win a national championship, they're like besides themselves and they can't stop celebrating and they lose focus. He goes right back into it. So he may lose a national championship, but he'll get right back into it. And every year he's back in the game.
So can you name a couple resources off the top of my head? I'm thinking John Maxwell books. He's a huge leadership guru.
I would say the things that have influenced me. Of course, I keep mentioning Extreme Ownership. The stuff by Hal Moore, that's one that's influenced me quite a bit too.
Oh, what book did he write? Hal Moore.
He's he was the guy that was the inspiration for the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young.
Okay, not the person I've seen.
Yeah, so he wrote the book. He commanded a infantry squadron or battalion in Vietnam.
So maybe for people who aren't as military oriented.
The Compound Effect is a good one. John Maxwell is always a good one. Craig Groeschel, Groeschel is a good resource. Andy Stanley's a good resource. He's a podcast. Both those guys, and they've both written books, so they're really, really good.
I mean, there's so many on it. You can
Right.
literally write a book, list of 50 things that you want to. Brian Tracy, we're actually super high tech here, and our phone is propped up on a bunch of books.
Our list is right there.
Our list is right there. Brian Tracy is an excellent author, so that's a great one as well. So
I mean, a lot of the Stephen Covey stuff, I think it's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
yeah,
7 Habits
of highly effective people.
Yeah, maybe that's Stephen Covey. One of them, I don't know. But those, those old books that were out there, once again, nothing's
They've been around
changed.
for a reason.
Yeah, they've been around for a while. So read them and devote time to read.
Yeah.
And everybody always has time. I can tell you, you have time, and if you don't have enough time, get up earlier, make time.
And do audio too, same thing.
Yep.
So we got taking ownership of everything in your life. We have study and personal development, learning how to grow yourself.
Right.
And finding those
tools.
Right.
And then finally, set the example. When you apply, one of the biggest mistakes I see people make, they don't really take ownership, they don't act with humility, they start studying, and then they go around, they bash people over the head with everything that they're studying and telling people how bad, they tell their boss how bad of a leader they are. That's not really getting it done. You got to model it in your own life. If you want your son to take more extreme ownership, then you better take extreme ownership. If you want your son to not make excuses, then you shouldn't make excuses. And so you really got to watch that, and that's hard to do. And one of the things that I've seen people do is they'll say, well, I was just venting. So they'll be talking about their spouse or their kids.
Oh, I hate that.
And it's always you have to watch
that
that, because if you're trying to influence those people who you love in your life, provided your spouse is not certifiably crazy or trying to murder you every night, if it's a good if it's
a good relationship,
right, a relationship built on love and trust, and you're going through a rocky spot, you got to look at yourself and then model the behavior. So if you want, let's say you don't believe your wife is kind. How are you reacting to her? Are you acting in the most kind manner that you can? How are you reacting to what, if she asks you to, or if you want her to, let's say, clean up more around the house? Are you cleaning up more around the house?
Did you choose that example specifically?
I would never point anything out with you. So I think it's and you always have to be careful the way you talk about your kids. If you think they're lazy, and this is hard with children, because I think children make us angry, and they just do. And I think everybody who's got kids in the house, I always say this about kids, it's the one human being in life that can make you so happy and emotional and cry, and then 14 seconds later you're mad, and then 38 seconds later you're emotional and happy and crying again. Kids do that to you probably more so than anybody that you'll ever know. So you got to set that example. If you don't want them to curse, well, then you shouldn't curse. And if you don't want them to drink, then maybe you shouldn't polish off a 12-pack in front of them at night. I mean, it's you really have to set the example, especially in your own life.
And okay, so since we're talking about that kind of stuff, I would say that a huge part of that is communication as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that, because you're never going to be perfect, and you're never going to get it right every single time. So acknowledging and communicating. So we never argue. We'll just leave that there.
Generally because I'm right.
No, the other day, it wasn't even an argument. We really truly don't argue in the typical sense. There's never any yelling or kind of back and forth. But, every once in a while we'll have a disagreement. And, just the other day as an example, we were talking about something. And he was coming from one perspective and I was coming from another. And I was like, I know that that's what you mean, but this is what I mean. And so I repeated myself like 3 times. Well, so, after we were done, of course, we're like, oh, well, you had to communicate through it so that you were like, okay, I understood what you said. Now I understand the other side, and, I'm sorry if I was cranky about it, So you're never going to be perfect in all of these areas, but, maintaining relationships and humility a huge part you were mentioning earlier was humility. A huge part of that is being able to take ownership, take responsibility, and apologize to people and communicate, your part in things, because it's not always going to be on the positive end. It's on the, semi vulnerable end as well, to take ownership sometimes.
Well, and one of the big things about being a leader is you got to be vulnerable. Sometimes people feel, you see this in a lot of new leaders, is they can never admit that they're wrong, and that probably is one of the worst bits of advice that you can ever take or give. Showing people that you're a human being and you make mistakes is very effective. And if you're saying sorry all the time and it's not your fault, I mean, you gotta balance that, and that's the whole thing. But being vulnerable is a very important aspect of leadership.
Yeah. So we have ownership, taking ownership, studying, personal development, growing yourself, becoming a better person, becoming who you want to be, and then setting an example helps you become a leader.
Right.
I also kind of wanted to talk about setting boundaries with people. So I'm just going to use myself as an example. I come across as a very confident person, but I often...
You're kind of a bumbling mess.
I am.
5 minutes or so.
Yeah. So, no, I come across very confident, and people have told me this, but I'm not really. And in fact, sometimes I'm very insecure, particularly when I'm relating to other people. And so sometimes, and especially as I gain more respect for myself and a little bit more self-confidence in who I am and what I want to do with my life, there becomes this struggle sometimes with other people then maybe demanding things from you and being able to set boundaries and establish those boundaries in a polite and professional way. So I kind of wanted to ask you what your perspective is on that.
So, and it's actually an interesting question, because there are times, especially if you lead an organization, where you can be as humble as you want. You can take ownership for things. And one of the most dangerous things, and I've seen this in the organizations I've been a part of, is I'm willing to set the example and take ownership, but people below me aren't. And they will use you and abuse your vulnerability and that sort of thing. You have to be very discerning as to what you do. So part of taking ownership, especially from a business or organizational standpoint, is sometimes ownership means you have to get rid of people.
Yeah.
That's part of it too.
What if they're not underneath, you're in a leadership position where you have control? What if you're not, though? What if it's someone that is above you that you need to set a boundary with in regards to how they treat you?
So I think that is as long as it's not illegal behavior that's coming at you, I think if it's illegal behavior, you should go to the authorities. If it's tough behavior, one of the things I read the other day, and I read it a year ago, I put it in my phone a year ago, and I forgot about it, is the degree of the influence is measured by the depth of the relationship. So if you have a tough boss who's always after you, or somebody who's in a support role, but let's say they're higher ranked than you, and they keep coming after you, you got to find a way to create more of a meaningful relationship. I know one of the things I used to do when I would run into bureaucrats, quote unquote bureaucrats that wouldn't be helpful, I would find a way to make them laugh. And that's what I would do. I would come over and I would bring them sodas when I would do that, or I would show up with things, or I would send them a joke. And initially they'd be like, huh? I remember one time in the Army, I was flying around to the units that we were supporting. We had a bad reputation. And just as a funny thing, I made a habit of hugging these guys. I would walk in and be like, hey, we're here. And I would hug them, and they would be like, what is this guy doing? And it was just something to completely disarm the situation. And then all of a sudden, we started to develop a relationship, which led to greater things. Of course, you had to deliver. You can't just do all these silly things and never deliver. Yeah. But you had to deliver. I think in maybe in your own life, let's say, you may tie it into maybe clients that aren't, that maybe push your boundaries, things like that. I think you have to be clear what those boundaries are. Once again, you don't have to be subjected to unprofessional behavior or illegal behavior. You don't have to deal with that, and you shouldn't ever, in the interest of running a business or whatever, or running your own life. Just don't. The other thing is you got to understand what your human capital is and how much you can expend on certain people. And all human capital is how much time are you going to spend with that person? Is there a requisite return? That sounds like a selfish thing, but does it become a good give and take? And if it's not, sometimes you've got to, once again, you got to take ownership of that and say, all right, I'm not going to invest more time in this.
Yeah.
And so, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you the question that I'm going to start wrapping up the podcasts with, and that is, how can we apply this in, this is a health and nutrition and well, a health podcast, generally speaking.
Yep.
So what is one thing that, in this vein, people can take away to stop dieting and start living their lives?
I would say stop making excuses. That's probably the number one thing. You hear people say, well, I'm over 40 now and I can't change, I'm over 40. That's not true. You can change. Or I have arthritis. That's one I hear a lot as people's excuse for not starting to work out or anything like that.
Do you really?
Yeah, people go.
A specific
People will say, "Well, I have arthritis." I'm like, "Well, you can cure arthritis. You can actually do." And I don't know what the whole medical piece behind it, but I know you can make it better.
You can,
And
that'll
so
have to be another podcast where we talk about that stuff.
Right. So it. I think you just take away the excuses. There are no limitations. The only limitations that exist are those in your mind.
And even if you do have something that makes you struggle, do what you can do. You know,
Yeah.
walking, regardless of almost any ailment, is one of the most beneficial things you can possibly do for your health.
Right.
Particularly, I mean, Patrick had had your disc. What do you call it? Rupture.
I had two herniated discs in my lower
Thank you.
back.
That's the word I was looking for. And one part of his healing process, you know, we got really intentional about it. And part of his healing process was walking a lot through the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was part of it. So not making excuses. I mean, it was
Right.
very painful, but he would drink stuff that tasted nasty because it was, you know, we researched what would help the cellular regeneration. We researched what would help the pain. We researched what would heal his back. And then he would walk through it. He would drink this stuff. He would take supplements that we found, you know, and a year and a half later, he was lifting heavy weights and back to normal.
Yeah, I would get up at 4 a.m. to
So, I
make
mean,
time.
this statement of don't make excuses is coming from someone that has experienced it. You know what I mean? So, I think that applies really well. Ownership and not making excuses applies really well. So, all right. Well, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Okay. So that was the end of our official recording. What's to say? Can I tell you something? So we'll look at that later. So, all right. So, guys, we're really glad that you're here. If you do have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have any topics that you would like covered in future podcasts or live videos, please comment below so that we can address them. We want to bring you content that you are most interested in that helps your self-development and your personal learning and your health journey. So we would love to hear from you. And just personal plug really quickly, I have a group starting March 18th for my second Get Gutsy With Me program. It's an 8-week program, and the women that are in the current program are seeing amazing results. And there was enough interest that I thought I was going to, delay the onset of the second program to maybe, late summer. Turns out I think I'm going to launch the second one in March, so I'm pretty excited about it. But the early bird of $97 to participate ends February 24th. So if you are interested, just message me so we can find out if it's the right thing for you. It's 8 weeks. You get meal plans, you get recipes, you get lots of videos from me, lots of information on gut health, food sensitivities, finding what works for your body. And then we also have optional upgrade to get personalized lab testing for food sensitivities and stool testing, which has literally changed our lives. So it makes a huge, huge difference. I mean, it has. It's
changed the way we go to the bathroom.
But it's literally made a big impact on everyone that's participated. So if you guys have any questions, please let me know. And thanks for being here today. Bye.